Security doesn't start with spending millions of dollars building a huge department. It starts with awareness. A culture that supports and prioritizes security is a necessity. How can you get your org on board? We're sharing some essential steps and lessons we've learned to help you build your security culture to support security awareness. Scott, we know that technology alone isn't enough to keep organizations secure. It really comes down to building a culture where everyone, from leadership to frontline employees, are engaged in security practices. In your experience, what are the key steps to creating a strong security awareness culture? And how can leaders ensure it becomes a core part of the organization?
You know, there's some very tangible things that can be done, and let's be frank. In most organizations, the tone from the top sets the tone for the org.
Sure.
Right? If it's not supported, it's amazing what an email or a message from a CEO can do, or a C-level of some department or group, right, or some branch of the business. You see that change tides.
Okay.
Right? I really do think when it comes down to it, from day one employees to your employees that you've had for a very long tenure, you know, they still do exist. You see, you know, folks that have people in their organizations that have been there for 20 years and they were there before the security days of where things became important. They still remember the filing cabinets that a couple people had keys to get into actual paper. But that's important, you know, so it's a function of how do we set that tone from the top, and how do we make sure through that partnership that we have with our leadership teams that gets, you know, really pushed through in an effective way. You know, not just say security is important here, folks, but security is a key critical component of this business and what makes it operate. Mm-hmm. It's critical to achieving the success as well as having an impact on potential failure. You know, really describing that in the context of the core being in core existence of the organization. It's just it goes so far, because now every other leader of every other group, because this is more than just a security component. You know, security awareness, security culture is more than just the security team's job. Mm-hmm. It's for us, of course, to uphold. It's us for us to train on. It's for us to enable. It's us to get in work relationships with other businesses, but it's also something that needs to happen throughout, because you know, when you think about policies, and then we have standards, and then we have standard operating procedures, how does now the security element start to fall into those categories, right? So think about your development. This is probably the easiest path. Your agile or waterfall or whatever the new development methodologies are. Waterfall is very old, but still potentially used in some project methodologies. How do we insert security into those distinct stage gates without disrupting business? How does it become an element of this is what is anticipated and this is checked, right? We do security code reviews. We do, you know, maybe some manual or some automated, you know, attack and pen on these types of outputs. And now this is just part of the culture. So now we have a development team that is well aware of the fact that security is key to their day-to-day. You know, some of the communication, you know, piece of it, when we're starting to get to it's October, it's Security Awareness Month. You know, think about in your career, right? All of the times that you've heard, you know, when you've been passing through the hallways and they're not sure that the CISO is around, or a security team is around, or, you know, on the risk and compliance side is around, and they're validating that this is taking place, that someone is actually invested in taking part of their security awareness training.
Oh gosh, yes.
It's poor, unfortunately, right? And I think that there's a lot of companies that are trying to determine from how do we educate on security in a security awareness training capacity that's going to help build culture out. But that's just one small component, right?
Correct.
It's not everything. So it's really in the tests that come out. You know, you're doing phishing simulations, and we're validating who is and who isn't, you know, clicking on the link. You know, I always used to tell a large majority of the organizations that I've worked for, if you click 50% less, we'd have 200% less issues, right? Because there are many avenues in which people on a day-to-day basis are going to be impacted potentially by security
Correct.
incidents. Even thinking about the USB drive that's sitting in a parking lot, this is going back some years. Somebody grabbed it and was just like, oh, well, let's see what it is and who it belongs to. And in the machine it goes. And, obviously we've got some controls around that to stop it. But it just goes to show that people are operating with expediency most of the time. We've got a variety of things that we need to get done. We always are trying to innovate, get more done, do it with less time. There's so much that goes behind it that security then just becomes part of, it washes out. Right? It's just part of the ether. So it's an important thing to do, but I think that's tone from the top, integrating workflows, having some of the configuration creep boundaries there to keep the risk tolerance in line.
Yeah.
But really, it has to be an organizational wide discussion and communication.
Yeah, so that's it. Okay. I want to push back a little bit on one item, because in most times I do believe that top down does work, but in this one I have a different viewpoint on it. I think the bottom up is super relevant here, and I love to kind of hear your thoughts on this. I think top down is easy to do, and then it could get passed over as just lip service, right? Like, I've not met no person I've reported to has ever said, hey, I'm gonna hire you as a security lead, but security is not important. I think but then what I think about a security culture, right? And I'll give you a kind of perfect example. Like, you leave your house. Most people leave their house and turn around and they do what? They lock the door. And you're like, well, okay. It's pretty standard. Like, if you weren't to do that, people would think you're weird or it's odd, right? And I look at building a security culture equivalent to that, meaning to say, how do we build a culture where doing the right security things is the norm? And I genuinely believe that starts from a bottom-up approach. Now, what that maybe not a bottom-up approach, but I don't want to.
I'd love to hear more.
About that. I don't know what bottom-up actually means in terms of what level, but meaning to say at the grassroots areas, right? So that's why I love this, and I think we talked about it in the last episode. That's why I really like the Security Champions program, right? Being able to embed security conversations within the normal flow of business, right? You had shared or something earlier that if you're walking down the hall and if the stuff that you hear, because people don't know you're part of the security team, my equivalent to that is, and I can't tell you how many organizations I've been a part of, and they're using Slack or some sort of Teams or whatnot, and there's a global search. And my favorite thing to do is just go in there and type password and click enter. Pull out my tea or whatever I'm doing and just see the results show up. And what I mean by the bottom up approach is that you'll look at the conversations and they'll say, hey, Scott, I'm logging to system X. Where's the password? Here, copy and paste. Now, if you were to talk to those individuals, they would say, well, look, I need to get my job done, but you're right, I probably shouldn't have done that. The question I ask is, if you build if you are able to build a security aware organization, the hope is that conversation is, yo, Scott, I'm working on the system. Where's the password? By the way, don't send it on this message, right? We have this system, share it there or whatever. And that organically becomes just part of the culture, right? And that's what I mean by, in this one instance, I think the security awareness really has to be kind of grassroots level, because that's when it is actually, I believe, authentic. I think folks buy into it without realizing it. And then early on in my career, I had a mentor who told me that, good security is the one that you don't know it exists. It's just there. And, young, I was like, well, what does that mean? I have a job. You're like, no, think about it. It's like, they're just doing all the right things without realizing it. And security, to me, that's how I define the security culture, is that are folks just doing the right things without realizing it? I can sit at the top of the mountain and yell and scream, and I'm sure you've been frustrated many times in your career with that. I just have found that hasn't, for me, in my experience, yielded very many good results. And I'll give you a kind of a tidbit story. We did a kind of phishing simulation, like a red team exercise, in one of the, our company was preparing to go public, and there was some excitement around this event, and we did an exercise to take advantage of that, and we had shared top down that, hey, with the additional press that will be released from this, you be on heightened alert of additional phishing campaigns. Mm-hmm. So we took advantage of this, and we ultimately did a campaign. And the baseline for response rate, this was almost like 20-30% higher. Mm-hmm. And it was a shock. It was an eye-opening moment to me, because I believed we did all the right things. Mm-hmm. Right? We communicated. Everyone had completed their trainings, et cetera, and we do this campaign, and the numbers didn't bear it out. Mm-hmm. And that's where, for me, I had to take a real hard look in the mirror to ask, like, why? And I have come to the conclusion that, yes, leadership has to buy in. Share that messaging. It has to be important there. But until we, within the organization, can find the grassroots way of changing that culture, you're probably not going to get the results that you want.
No, that's fair. It's. I hear where you're coming from. The counter arguments. If you don't have that support from the top, suggesting it across the board, and maybe from my days in the governance, risk, and compliance mm-hmm. world, and seeing it and evaluating it, to your point, right? The phishing simulations and the things that we can test and have some type of output from. Mm-hmm. You go in and identify, okay, we've got some things that we need to do, right? We've got some controls that we need to assess. And these might not be monetary controls, but process-based controls.
Okay.
They're going to combat risk.
Okay, all right, okay.
Middle out approach. Why? Why do I need to do this? No, where's the support coming from? Noise. Yeah. These are things that it's a sad reality, but it's true, right? Everybody's got a job that they need to do. When it comes down to that grassroots, I think it happens both sides then, right? So you can't, it's not just an edict that comes down that security is important.
That's fair.
But support to say that these activities that are taking place are critical to the business and to the leadership teams, and it's discussed. Some of the best organizations that I've worked in, where even from when I was in IT and coming up in that space, it was a general function of, we're getting together and we're having a conversation on lessons learned of what we came across this last year, how we can all make an impact. And I've worked at organizations large and small,
okay,
20,000 people plus down to, under 100, in certain cases, throughout my career. But it really came down to, the support was there because the time, energy, and effort was put toward it. The impact that it has on the business, having an identification and knowledge of the data and the types and the impact that those types of data that we have as organizations, because I know I personally don't love getting the letter in the mail of, my information was put out into a breach, but we're talking about consumer-based data. You've got potential consumer-based data that's coming in from third parties, or you're sharing with third parties. There's all these things that we just generally need to be aware of, from how do we make sure that what we're doing is safe and secure? How are we handling this information now when we have to do these extra steps, when we have to go through these exercises? It's understood. So when it comes down to, yes, you are correct, that people need to have the ability to consider what the right thing is. They have to know what the right thing is. Mm-hmm. There has to be some type of controlling function to make sure that people don't operate outside of the boundaries, because haste makes waste.
Sure.
People are trying to be quick and what have you, but none of those things largely happen without some tone from the top that says, we support these initiatives.
Got it. Okay. So I hear you, and I'm gonna give you some tidbit. I'd love to hear your statement on this. So we had a vulnerability program, right? Mm-hmm. So you do your scannings, stats, all that stuff, application security, all of that, for infrastructure and whatnot. And so we hadn't made it, we had some a handful of customer escalations that happened where the customer's like, hey, there's these outstanding security vulnerabilities that you guys, are approaching SLAs and et cetera, like when are they going to get done, all the above. And so some of them were some pretty big uplifts in the re-architecturing some of the code for our application. So there was a pretty large emphasis placed on the leadership layer to say, okay, let's double down, tell all the teams security's priority, et cetera, finish your vulnerabilities, all the above. Had the buy-in. And so what we did at that point, we said, okay, let's be scientific about this. Mm-hmm. So let's look at what our baseline for our vulnerabilities are during this campaign. Mm-hmm. At the start of this campaign. Mm-hmm. And let's then see what marginal difference it would make. Okay. So we went to that for I think almost a year. To be honest with you, it didn't make much of a difference. Okay. So then we implemented, and this is where my love of the Champions program starts. We said, look, let's start this Champions program, and let's not even enable it for all of our development teams. Let's go to the small number of teams and let's double down with them. They had the highest number of vulnerabilities, scan after scan. So the infrastructure team, there were some front end teams that we ended up partnering with, and the alignment was with the middle to tier managers. So we said, hey, this is a security program. They all got buy-in. So we identified key team members within. That actually reduced vulnerabilities from the scans by almost 30%, 40, right in that number. Now it was a small sample size, and there's all, obviously you can make an argument against that. But what I think it highlighted more so than anything was you and I can yell on and say, but is it actually changing the culture? I think it can maybe set the tone to some extent, right? But to truly treat that culture of security really requires that grassroots piece. And maybe it's a definition thing.
Yeah, it could.
Yeah, because I think
one can't happen without
100%.
You just can't say it.
Correct.
But that teeter-totter effect of what bucket gets filled and how does it get filled comes from support, right? And then that gives you charter to go and get a lot of that done. But I think at the end of the day, what we're really getting at is, leadership does play a role. There is most certainly the grassroots. I love the Security Champions program. Yeah. Getting people that are outside of, and we would have similar exercises in some of the larger organizations. Right. We had BISOs that weren't part of the security team. They didn't report into the security team, but they had some responsibility over understanding what the risk was.
And there's a trend for that now too. You're seeing a lot more BISOs, right?
Right, which is good. Yeah, I think it's just it only highlights the point that how do we make the idea of security a part of the day-to-day for everyone, regardless if it's very small or it's very large based on their role. How do we get support across our organization so it's not just this, this idea of here's the big bad security team, badge heavy. Even if you're nice and approachable, it's some added task. And if people see it as an added task and it's one that could be ignored, then it becomes a problem. So it's really, how do you make this consumable by everybody? How is it a partnership, and how does it have the support and awareness? Yeah. And think about the self-reporting, right? I opened up this email, I clicked this button, it wasn't a part of the phishing campaign. You can't chastise that person for self-reporting, right? Yeah. You take that example and say, hey, this happened, and this person, did report it, and we celebrate that they reported it. Mistakes do happen. Yeah. That wasn't complete malfeasance there. Sure. Right? That was just a mistake. So I think it's key for part of these things. It's not just train, it's integrate, but also really draw and lead by example. Yeah, right? And that's key to really making yourself accessible to the greater organization, not to do tasks, but to be aware of this is what we're trying to achieve. Yeah. And I'll just add to one point there. I think making it really intimate, meaning to say, like, if it's close to the teams that actually have the biggest effect, and then it becomes part of their day-to-day, that's how we should look at security culture.
more so than, okay, we've set the tone and this is what we all want to prioritize, but the actual tangible effect will come from that intimacy. If you think this show is awesome, then you need to know about the media company that's behind it. Sweetfish is a video podcast agency that works with B2B brands to produce shows like this one. If you're interested in joining this show as a co-host in season 2 and beyond, or your marketing team is looking for a video podcast partner to develop a show that your company owns, you should reach out to Sweetfish. Just go to sweetfishmedia.com and book a call with someone from their team. So we'll dive into some data that the Sweetfish team has found for us. So today's actually stat is eye-popping for me. I didn't know this, and so according to a 2024 cybersecurity almanac from Cybersecurity Ventures and Evolution Equity Partners, only 3% of organizations globally have reached a mature level of readiness to be truly resilient against today's cybersecurity risks, which means the vast majority are vulnerable. So Scott, 3%. What do you think?
I mean, that's 3%. And what does maturity mean, right? There's probably a lot of detail behind some of these stats, and these are the things that we need to dig into. Of course. When it really comes down to, I buy it. When you think about the 0 days, when you think about the APTs, when you think about the next gen of any new threat that's coming out there, it's a constant evolution, right? It's where are we starting to leverage some of the behavioral analytics that are going to really draw out normal from abnormal behavior? Where are we going to make sure when we start to think about, what are we marching toward for maturity? Are these 3%, is it to state that, hey, if they got hit with something that they would be able to respond and everything is thumbs up and they're going to minimize their breach or their impact of breach? Maybe not. Maybe it's something that they've got a good program that, maybe that dwell time, maybe something along the lines of materiality is going to be able to get called out. But, when I think about some of these things is, there's the CMMI models, right? There's all the maturity models there. You can go ISO, you can go NIST, you can go to the COBITs or the COSOs, depending on the frameworks or the standards that you're trying to meet. There's great ways to start to look at controls. I always think about what risks are we trying to solve for and how do we put the right controls around those risks. But all the risks should be tied to the business objectives. And does that mean maturity for the business, or does that mean maturity for a framework? So
what if it's counter to it though, right? Because I think that to me 3% highlights that. Because I don't know how much I love the Sweetfish team, but I don't know. This 3% seems really. I would want to dive into that a little bit, but I don't know. Because they have some resilience words in there and against today. So it's now it can be, and again we can kind of dive into this a little bit, but it can be that we talked about that 277 day. I think in a previous episode where we talked about it takes 277 days to identify a breach. It can lead to, okay, that is the definition of immaturity, meaning to say that it shouldn't take that long of a time for a mature organization to respond.
Right.
But I want to believe that, we're doing a good job as a security. Right. This makes me a little bit pessimistic that we are.
Well, and that's the world of security, right? I mean, there is, I think, in having had conversations with you now, it's like you can see there is optimism, and that's good. You need to have that hope and that drive to continue to push forward. The next new iteration of whatever threat that's going to take place, the position on what data is at risk, who is it going to end up in the hands, and who is it going to... I mean, we're even in a state today where AI is going out and creating essentially fake data, and they're calling it ransom data. We exfiltrated this from your organization, right? It's just this is we're also in that same state because of, I talked a little bit about the SEC guidelines, that now those same attackers are now using that as leverage to say, if you don't do something quick enough, we're going to contact the SEC and create all kinds of noise. There's something new that's going to come out every single year, every single day for that matter, that we need to be prepared for. So when I see, in polls, I mean, let's say, election season aside, right? So here in the position of polls, and how do we identify maturity on what? Right? What are we measuring against? So when if anyone sits there and tells me that we are 100% ready for 100% of the threats that could absolutely take place, and we're resilient against those threats, there is such a wide ocean that exists between the type of
that's
business,
unattainable.
the type of data. That's exactly right. It's not, and that goes back to the position of every organization has some amount of risk. What amount of that risk is acceptable? What can be managed through exception? What can be transferred potentially for insurance? How do we have all of the various layers that are in place? Because it's key, right? To really understand everything that's in place here and what a 3% means. There are organization size, different verticals. I doubt that anyone in healthcare potentially is represented in this, as they're continually under attack. But look at all the industries that are under attack on a routine basis as well. I just, when I see things like this, I try to take that step back and say, okay, well, what are those things that are impacting maturity gains at organizations? What are the barriers? Right? What are we've talked about, is it a tone from the top? Is it a bottom up? Is it middle out? We talk about, how do we get different technologies in place? How do we have a technical skills gap that all exists? How do we, essentially have, the leadership support and awareness for some of these things to be ready for an attack? At the end of the day, you got to be prepared to the best that you can be based on what you know from what's happened in your business, as well as your peers. Partnering with external organizations, that's very key, because you can only, again, and having the visibility to the things that you're trying to protect. These are all things that are going to build to a model of, okay, now that I know these elements, these key core objectives that we're trying to maintain, this type of data that we have, these types of processes and people that impact it, this is the essential attack surface that we have as an organization. Now, do we start to put the pieces back together? And it goes through essentially every single domain that we have in the information security space, right? Right. So it is a jarring stat, and I think most people almost feel that, and it's almost better to operate under the context that we're not mature, because then that's going to continue the path of continuing to mature. I would hate to be in a position of saying we're all ready. We're all good.
Yeah,
right?
good. Yeah. If anyone says that, they're lying.
Right.
But the other thing I wanted to also tie into this is that's why the conversation of the discussion today is so relevant and important, is because the awareness of the organization, the culture really will drive a lot of what you're saying, right? Without it, you're not going to make much mark. Right. And so being really honest with yourself about, okay, let's take that number for fact. Okay, it's 3%. That means 90% of organizations haven't reached the maturity level. And then that percentage of organizations, there's multiple domains in which they're deficient. Now, you and I think if we take all the security teams that or have been part of or have some interaction with, they're all understaffed, or they all will say to you, look, we can use a person to do A, B, and C, X, Y, and Z. So 90% organizations are deficient. You have security teams that don't have that would say that, hey, we don't have enough team members to then go out and reduce all this risk. So then how do you solve it? Right? Are we just saying, okay, let's pick the crown jewels and put protection around that? Okay, that's one solution. Or how do we scale without growing the team, right? Meaning to say, how do we scale our impact beyond just the X number of people who are on the security team? And it's that security culture, right?
True.
It's that's how this maturity increases, right? Because now each team that's responsible for that domain becomes a security sub team in themselves, right? So now HR, okay, the areas that we would like for them to put some security controls in place. We don't have to hire a quote unquote HR security team member.
No, yeah,
but you designate someone within, and then now that starts, that engine starts to flow. Okay. The physical, I mean, whatever domains that each organization is deficient in, but that's why I am such a strong believer in this specific thing here. Because if you get this right, or let me take that back. If you can make marginal progress here, it'll have an outstripped effect on the maturity, on your ability to limit your risk, et cetera, But without that, it is much more difficult to make those type of gains. And so 97%, again, that's a high number, but the security culture and being able to do that in such a way is vitally important.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, no, on that, it's key to me that there's always room to grow. There's always room to get better.
Yeah.
There's always room to start taking advantage of what's available. People, technology, process, and support is key to this entire thing.
All right. So in case you didn't know, we're on YouTube. You can find every one of our full-length episodes over there. But we also do a special series that you can only find on YouTube. In that series, Scott and I break down the global legislations that's shaping the future of cybersecurity. Just search CISO Circle on YouTube and you'll see us pop up. All right, now it's time for our final segment. And we're playing a little game called Phishing or Phishing. I'll read Scott an email snippet and he tells me if it's a phishing attempt or a legitimate email. Then we'll switch.
Oh, so catching fish.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about language.
All right. So Scott, I'll read an email snippet and you tell me if it's a legitimate email or a phishing attempt.
Okay.
And then we'll switch. Cool?
All right.
All right, let's go. First email. Dear Scott, your mailbox has exceeded the storage limit. Please click the link below to revalidate your account and prevent deactivation. Legitimate or phishing?
I'm going to call this phishing. It's not the phishing, as you called it, legitimate right now, but phishing. That's obviously a call to attention, some shock and awe. Click a link to validate an account that's tied to exceeding a limit. This just doesn't make sense.
I feel like you've been, but you are correct, my friend. You are correct. You are correct.
Good.
Cool. So, all right. So the next one. Hey, Scott, looking forward to our meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Let me know if you need to reschedule. Best, Aftab.
That's like a typical day-to-day message. There's no link. There's no call to action or shock and awe here. That's a legitimate daily routine.
2 for 2, man. 2
Hey,
for 2.
look at
2 for 2. 2 for
That's
2.
a
All right.
A plus student so far.
All right. So I gave you a few layups. So let's get the last one. Let's see
All
all right. Last one. Scott, your package delivery is on hold. Confirm your shipping address here to receive your package. Phishing or legitimate?
Oh, that's phishing. That's phishing. You know, and it's a shame that you get these in text messages now. You get these in email, and you know, and also the shame is the number of people that actually click on this.
Yeah,
it's I want that package, right? I've got to do something about this. Call to action. That's always key. Well, my friend, this is your. Well, I was correct, right? I just wanted to validate.
No,
that,
you're right. You're right. You're right.
The USPS store may have like a million of my packages because I continue to get this message.
Yeah. Okay.
So, all right, your turn.
Cool.
We're
Okay.
gonna flip the tables here, and we're gonna ask you: is it phishing or legitimate? All right. So here we go. Your first email, dear employee. Please review the attached document regarding our updated HR policies. Best HR department. Phishing or legitimate?
Okay, so why would they send a document? So likely phishing. Likely phishing.
Yeah.
Final answer.
That I'm going to go with phishing. That seems like a great phishing simulation email, right?
Yeah.
Comes from HR. It calls you dear employee, right? Click on something. Let's open this thing up, and next thing you know, you just infected the entire network.
Yep.
All right, no, that is correct. That is phishing. All right, so your next email. Your recent credit card payment of $1,200 has been processed successfully. Aftab, the big spender. Thank you for your payment. Company logo. Phishing or legitimate?
Okay, so if it's at my business email, it's 100% phishing.
Yeah. No,
So I would, I separation between church and state. I never use business email for personal. So final answer, phishing.
Yeah, I definitely phishing. I can't even think of the context in which that anybody would get an email saying your $1,200 process had just gone through, your expense has just gone through. Like that. That's not even a realistic email that comes through, but it is something that the phishers, especially in line with AI today, they're creating better messages. Something to be aware of, I think, for the audience out there. But nonetheless, let's get into your last mail. So far, we're knocking it right out of the park. We're real good at answering these questions.
It's better be lucky than good, man.
That's what it comes down to here. All right, so your last email here. So, reminder: team lunch today at noon in the main conference room. See you there. Phishing or legitimate?
Yeah, there's really, like you said, no call to action.
Yeah.
Assuming there's a team lunch, I think it's legitimate. I would
Well, if you get that, it might be a surprise party for you. That is a legitimate email. It is, like you said, no call to action. I think it's pretty weak in regard to calling something or in no action to be done.
But that's a big takeaway. Is like the call to action. So
what do you expect to be normal routine business, and what's something that just kind of comes and pops out of you out of anywhere? But hey, we learned something new. We had a great conversation, today again about security culture. I think it's important as we continue to push it through. So
100%, no, absolutely, and again, I think the time you can spend on building that culture has an out. Like they say, you're punching above your weight class in terms of your so okay, cool. Well, great. Well, thank you again for playing the game. It's always interesting. So before we wrap up, we'll be diving into a topic of third-party risk management. With so many organizations relying on vendors and partners, managing the risks that come from outside of your own walls is more important than ever. We'll explore the best strategies for identifying and mitigating these risks and talk about how you can ensure your entire supply chain is secure. It's going to be a fun one.
Remember, security fuels innovation, complexity is the enemy, and collaboration is the way. Until next time.